Hello, and welcome to another episode of Decoder Podcast, where we demystify the world of software development for our listeners. We'll take you behind the scenes of a software development agency to explore how digital products are crafted from concept to completion. So I'm Sara Altenhoff, and today I'm joined by...
I'm Greg Ross-Munro.
And I am Justin Davis.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey, Justin. Hey, Greg.
How are you doing? Happy Friday again.
Happy Friday. So today we're going to talk about product design critiques. So we're going to give you tips on how to critique products effectively. Our goal is to help you engage with designers and developers more effectively for a more seamless product development experience. So we're going to cover how to communicate your various design concerns, what is the language of digital product design, and sort of how to recognize a good design versus a bad design.
Are we doing it from like a general perspective, or are we saying there's a good way to do this, or are we going to say like there's a scale between making somebody feel like it's not really a big deal to making them cry? I think we're going to shoot for somewhere along that line.
Yes.
Yeah. So first, before we dive in, Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and then Greg, you could give us your background, and we can explain like all of our perspectives here. So Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. Over here at Sourcetoad, I am our VP of UX, so I oversee all the design, overall design and user experience of the products, as well as down to the visual design layer as well. I've been an engineer for, golly, I don't know, since like 1997 or whatever I started writing code. So I don't know, 20, 30, 25 years, something like that. I've been writing code. I've built a number of different, I've built a ton of products, designed hundreds of thousands of products for clients over the past 20 years. And so I'm pretty full stack in terms of product. Have seen a lot, come from an architecture and design background, actually, which is what I went to school for. So I have a little bit of formal design training, and a whole lot of skin my knees design training.
There's no way you've designed hundreds of thousands of products. There's no way you've designed
No, hundreds or thousands.
Oh, hundreds or thousands. Okay, sorry.
It might be over the 1,000 mark. I don't know.
Okay, fine. That's fair.
Not hundreds of thousands. No.
That doesn't.
I'm fast, but I'm not that fast.
Yeah, and my story kind of dovetails a little bit with Justin's, because I started designing games when I was a kid, writing code for the games, and always kind of enjoyed more the design side, not just like the architectural design, but the actual like graphic engines and the background creation systems. Those are the things that I really was drawn to, and those are what I programmed as a result back in the day, before you had like cool art management software and stuff. And then from a professional perspective, I started, I've been building custom software for people since I was like 15 or something. So like almost 30 years. And most of the time I was kind of like one foot in the design world and one foot in the development world. And most of the time I was doing both. And I always thought that I was good at both, to be honest. I thought like, oh yeah, I'm a pretty good designer. I'm a pretty good developer. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not very good at either of those things. I'm just like Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Which is, the more I've gotten to know people and work with people who are actually like, oh, this guy's a really good designer, or she's an amazing developer, you realize how bad you are at all these things. So, there you go. That's my background, Sarah. I'm a bad designer and a bad software engineer.
Perfect.
So a perfect CEO.
This is really depressing.
So we could dive in, and we can use this sort of app idea that we've talked about a few times on this podcast, that I have, about building an app to help people with orchids and other houseplants.
We're going to have to build this thing, Justin.
Yeah.
So let's walk through this whole episode and kind of refer back to this app idea I have. So say I'm working with a development team, it's my very first app I've ever paid to have developed. And the first visuals I'm seeing of the app. I really don't like how they look. But since I've never gone through this process before, I don't really know how to communicate what I like and what I don't like about the design. So Justin, can you give some pointers on how I can more effectively communicate the dissatisfaction I have with the app's look to my development team in a way that they can, like, respond to that in an effective way?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And it's one that is a little harder. It's a little trickier sometimes because sometimes you'll look at something and go, I just don't like it. I don't like this thing. Right?
Okay, I've said in this room. Can I be the client for a second, Justin?
Yeah. Please.
Like I can't put my finger on it. It's not what I imagined in my head. It doesn't pop enough. It's not colorful enough. It doesn't really stand out. And it just looks like everything else. And I just don't know what it is really that I don't like about it. But there's just something is not going right here. Have you heard that before?
I have definitely heard that before. And the thing that I would ask at that point, that I would ask to a client then, and I think as a client, if you're on the other side, you can ask yourself, is you stop and say, hey, why is that? I heard some things in what you just said that I know are values of yours, right? Obviously, differentiation is important. It sounds like you want something that feels kind of unique, like it has your brand personality on it. That tells me something a little bit about what you value as a client, or what I think you value, right? So my job now, in my role as a designer and as a service provider, is to say, okay, awesome. So what I hear you saying to me, active listening, is I hear that you're saying that you don't like it, that it doesn't feel differentiated enough. Like it's not delivering impact in the way you want to. And what I would then ask is, I would say, talk to me more about why that is so important to you and the brand, and how that gets expressed elsewhere, so we can understand that, right? And so I would probably approach it that way. And so when you are looking at giving some feedback on something, and you're thinking, oh man, I don't know how to give feedback, what should I say? I would say, say the same thing that I say to my kids when they're trying foods and they go, I don't like this food, right? I give them something to eat and they're like, I don't like this. And I say, don't just say you don't like it, because that's not helpful to anybody, and it gets very repetitive. But why don't you like it? Pick something out about it that you don't like. Is it a texture? It's too crunchy, it's too slimy, it's too whatever. Is it a colored thing? Is it a tasting? Is it too acidic? Is it too whatever? Right? When you're looking at a design, think, why don't I like this? Is it that it's too pale? It's not colorful enough, right? It's not, go behind the I don't like it and start to unpack why. Now, that may not be easy at first. It's not quite as easy sometimes as it is with food, because we practice that quite a bit. But as you do that more and more, you'll develop more of a muscle for sort of connecting with the real reasons that you don't like what you're seeing, and that'll help you express better where you see those gaps.
What if they just say, what if I am in a conversation where I don't actually have the answers to those questions? Where it's like, well, you asked me like why it's important to be differentiated, and the answer is, well, because I don't want to be like everybody else. Right? Like that's a fairly common thing for people to say. It's like, I want my app to stick out. I want my website to stick out. I want my logo to stick out in my space. And maybe that's actually a more philosophical question really than like a design critique question, because there's like so much education that's needed in the marketing and the go-to-market kind of side of that. That the question that's not a design critique question. You're too far down the chain at that point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point, because like you could also sort of like approach that and say, like, that is a need, that's a feeling that like you can empathize with, right? And you can, of course, you want to be differentiated. You're making a product, you want it to be different in the market, you want it to have its own identity, right? So, and we can talk about why that's important, and I think some of those reasons why that's important is pretty like obvious, right? Some of those things we don't even need to really talk about. Then we can talk about, like, what is the value of being differentiated in this market? Let's talk about what the other competitors look like and how they work, and how differentiated do we actually have to be? Remember, design is problem solving, right? It's not necessarily just like expressing art onto the world. What we're trying to do is we're trying to gain an advantage by using this thing to get some other goal for our product or our company. So then we can quantify that and we can say, okay, let's look across the landscape and see. The other thing you can do in that moment is you can say, what else are we doing in our business with our logo, with our website, with our marketing, with our other advertising and marketing cloud or whatever it is, where we are also doing that differentiation? Have we brought that over to the design team and communicated to them, hey, here's these assets that we have. Like when we go put a sign out, when we put an ad out, we always do this crazy yellow guy. Like, oh, you've never seen the crazy yellow guy? You got to put the yellow guy in, right? And sometimes it's easy to forget that people experience your brand across multiple channels, sometimes simultaneously, oftentimes very quickly, like, or, across time, whatever. And so make sure that you were pulling, like, design. If you were trying to create differentiation and you're trying to use design as a competitive advantage, it's used across the entire enterprise, not just in the product. And so it actually should just end up in the product. And if it isn't ending up in the product, it may mean that it isn't at the enterprise level, or is it being communicated to the product team that it is being done there?
Okay. So I have a question then for both of you, because both of you guys, Sarah, you do a lot more design work than I do these days, even though we're talking about your app. And Justin, you kind of do design, I guess, for a living. Like large portions. Both of you are like design for a living. You both had to like work with me in situations where I'm like, I don't like that. Or like, I want to change this one thing about it. What is it important that when someone's giving you design feedback like that, that I'm not going to hurt your feelings? Is that important? Is that a consideration? Like, if you tell me, like, if I come to you and I say, oh, this is really not good, are you going to cry yourself to sleep tonight? I mean, I'm serious. Like, and then like, is there a better way to, and if I hurt your feelings enough, are you not going to want to continue to do good work? Are you going to like end up resenting me? Like, how should I even take that from an emotional standpoint? Or should I not care? Are you just like professionals and you're just used to people being crazy?
I think from my point of view, from working with you, you could never hurt my feelings by giving me like feedback on designs, because I'm pretty good at separating that from like my feelings.
I'm going to push this now. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So like say, and this has actually happened, this is a real example. I made like a landing page and there were some square boxes and you were like, I don't really like that. But you gave me specific feedback. You weren't like, I don't like it. You were like, what's with the square boxes here? I'm like, okay, I don't care. I'm like, let's make them round. Like, if you're not liking the square. So in that case, like, it was helpful that you said specifically what you didn't like. And I didn't care. I'm like, okay, I'm not married to the square boxes. Let's make them round. Like, hey.
Okay, that's fair. I got a follow-up question for that, but I'm curious about Justin's answer as well.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I struggled with this. Honestly, I struggled with this for a long time early in my career. And you hear as a designer all the time, like, you are not your work is not you, separate it. If people critique your work, it's not critiquing you, blah, blah. I did not believe that for years. I mean, I believed it in my head, but I could not get my heart to believe it for a long time, right? And like every time somebody said something, it hurt, right? And I was like, what? This is not good. And over time, you develop the ability with practice to distance yourself from your work better and say, like, this is just a thing I made. And if it's not right, it's not right. We'll find a better way to do it, right? And that is what it is. I think that, like, as a client, you owe it to express your feelings. You shouldn't worry about hurting somebody's feelings. You shouldn't be violent. You shouldn't say, this piece of whatever
Garbage,
trash, this piece of trash, I can't believe you gave this to me. I mean, you shouldn't be like that. Again, when we align,
this Orchid's app design isn't good enough for fertilizer.
Right. But when we have conversations about design around goals, right, and we say, I don't feel like this design accomplishes this goal because of these reasons, we take the personal bit out of it, right? And now we're just all sitting around looking at a problem that we're still trying to solve together. I think it takes a while to get, as a designer, I can tell you, it takes a while to get good at that and to get comfortable with that level of distancing. But at the end of the day, the design isn't you. It is just an attempt to solve a problem, and most of the time we don't solve problems right the first time. We always have to rewrite books. Like,
when is it your responsibility though? Like at some point, like the stakeholder, whoever's paying for it at the end of the day is ultimately the client or whatever. So the customer. So the customer's always right. But is there a time when you have to step back and say like, no, the customer is not right. Like I'm gonna fight this. Like you can't. This I have thought through this more than you have.
Yes, that's a hard place to be in sometimes. Yes.
You and I, we've been in this
situation before. There's kind of a couple answers to that. One is I have developed over the years a very pick my battles approach to this. Some things, because I can quickly think about what the effects are of a thing on it, like, okay, you want that little thing, you want it like that, who cares? Like, it's not really going to have a big impact. I will give you that. Like, not a big deal, right? Sometimes there are times that I see things where I'm like, there's such a large scale problem here that as a professional, I've spent 20 years studying this. I do it every day, all day, in and out. I am very good at knowing what is and is not successful in building products at this point because I've had a lot of experience doing it. And so I believe that when clients come to me as a provider, as a vendor, whatever, that I have a certain level of professional responsibility to say, hey, listen, based on what I know, and again, I'm not going to go back to you and say, I don't like this, I think this is ugly. I'm going to come back to you with the exact same level of rigor that I want out of you as a client in the design discussion. And I'm going to say, I have concerns about this design. The concerns that I have are that it doesn't match accessibility standards, or it's going to be very difficult and hard to build. And given what you've told me about what your goals are, I don't know that you're going to get the payback here. Or you're trying to do something here that actually is against a standard pattern for which a lot of other users are using other apps, and then they come to your app, and then your app does it differently. And that's not the kind of differentiation that you want. That causes usability problems. And usability problems lead to support problems, and support costs money. And so what I like to do is like tell the story about how these design decisions, it's not about taste. It's never about taste. It's always about, is this effective for what we're trying to do? And sometimes it is our responsibility to step in and say, I understand that you want what you want, and I can empathize with you wanting to express yourself in your product. And we can find ways to do that. But we shouldn't do it in ways that are going to harm the user's experience along the way. So let's find the middle ground.
So it almost kind of gets more into like a business strategy advice there,
Because at the end of the day, we're not doing design for fun. We're doing design because it's a necessary thing. By the way, nobody wants to interact with a UI. No one wakes up in the morning and it's like, oh man, I'm gonna get some coffee and I can't wait to go use a web app today, right? Nobody is excited about using web app.
There's in the Spider-Man 2 game, the movement between buildings is so good, and you can still fast travel. You can still travel around anywhere you want in New York, and I will still swing from building to building. It is not necessarily. I will interact with that UI as a form of relaxation,
just because it feels so good. I love it. But most normal people without severe mental ailments don't actually.
I don't go play with my spreadsheets that way. Yeah.
Right. And so the thing to remember is design. We only do design. And I think this way about code too. We only have to do design because we have to give the users a user interface, right? They aren't asking for it. And so I think you have to sort of just check yourself. We're not making art. We are trying to solve a problem that ultimately at the end of the day is trying to get a business objective.
So I think this is a good segue into like the actual language of design. So we know that it's not good to just give very vague feedback like, oh, I feel that this, it just doesn't feel right, etc. So what type of language should clients be using, clients and stakeholders be using when they're discussing design? So say I received some visuals from the company I'm working with, and they've used all these like photorealistic sort of icons, and I am like, oh, I don't like those. What's a way I can communicate that in using specific design language to get the outcome that I want?
I feel this a lot, which is that because I give more feedback now than I do actually more design. I only ever sketch things and show them, then give them to people like Justin who like actually make them into something that like works. But building vocabulary around what it is that you're trying to express is a responsibility of yours if you want to give design direction. If you are working with designers the same way if you're working with developers, or if you're working with if you're building a custom house and you don't like educate yourself, if you don't pick up a book about like building custom houses, whatever, you're gonna be part of the problem.
Or about houses in general. If you don't know what a soffit is and you just say, I don't like how the top part is kind of dangly, then like it's not like a helpful piece of feedback. Yeah.
Your tennis came out a little bit there.
No, but like there is some you don't have to be an expert. There's a couple of good books you can, even just one good book. I mean, Justin's always promoting one, but which was a game changer for me as well. But which is called what, Justin? We're not plugging a product here or anything.
Yep, it's called Discussing Design. It's a fantastic book about just doing design critique, written by two guys who are phenomenal colleagues of mine, who I used to see a lot of the conference circuit. Remarkable designers in their own right. Yeah.
But talking. There's two things I think you should do. One is educate yourself to some degree, so that some of the language you use and some of the ways that you talk about critiquing is that you have some common vocabulary, right? Like, okay, I know that they are using a design framework, or they're like, this is more flat design versus something that's trying to have shadows or something like that, right? Some language around that is your responsibility. And the problem with that is that people don't think of design a lot of the time, I think, as a learnable skill. They think about the whole world around you is designed, and people, I think, have kind of this feeling that it's something you pick up, it's something you have, it's a skill, or it's something that is innate with everybody. Like, oh, I like the way that looks. I've seen the new Coca-Cola bottle packaging, and I think it's garbage. And I like the old one, and as a result, I have an opinion about design. And that is not the case. You have an opinion about the overall aesthetic about something, but you couldn't really describe like what it is about that particular font weight, or about the kerning that's like just throwing you off a little bit, right? Or the gradient. And I'm not talking about like these specific words, but you have to have some sort of understanding of the vocabulary around that space, and an understanding that it is not just an innate skill that you have as a human being. It's not like your ability to smell something sweet or spicy or something. So I think that is the first step, is stepping back and understanding what you don't know, and then spending a little bit of time educating yourself.
I think that's right. And I think also like what you were talking about is kind of like what we were talking about a little bit earlier about like kind of asking, why don't you like this? And there's an exercise called the 5 whys. It's like a popular kind of thinking exercise, which is just to keep asking why. Ask why 5 times, right? And usually it's like getting to the question behind the question. It's really important, And so like, yeah, I think just continuing to ask yourself why. I don't like that. Why? Well, it just feels really squished. Why? Well, like the font just looks really like, I don't know, squishy kind of looking. Why? Well, because the letters like are too close together. Why? Oh, because the kerning in the letters is set to negative 25%. Great. So we can go change the kerning, spread the letters out, and now all this gets fixed. Now, I explain that through the lens of a knowledgeable designer who understands that whole chain of things. But the point is to continue to ask yourself why. We'll get to root cause, right? And root cause we can deal with. And so I think that's really important. I think another trick that I will tell you, and I think this is the best trick for giving better design feedback, that I've ever learned in my career. And that is to stop saying the word I. Just stop saying the word I and never say the word I like or don't like.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about taste. And so what we're actually having a discussion about is whether our users will interact with it, not what we are going to be doing with it or what we think about it, because we are not our users. Even if we are one of our users, we are not all of our users, right? And so it's not helpful, because when we start to say things like, well, I don't like when that happens, or, oh, you know what I really love? I love when I use Facebook and XYZ happens. Well, that's not really helpful, because that's just telling us about random things you like in apps and not things that apply here. But if you say rephrase that and take the I out and think, what? How could I better say that? Instead, say our users. Okay, well, our users really like this thing on Facebook. Do we know that? Actually, now we don't. So now we need to go to research and find that out, right? Our users might find it like difficult to use this because of XYZ, instead of I find it difficult to use this because of XYZ. That one shift in language, A, changes your perspective, and B, it's going to make your conversations go a lot easier, because when you start to say I, we can do a taste conversation. And if you say I like this, somebody else is going to go, well, I don't like this. So now where are we? We're not in a productive place, right? But if we can externalize that and say, well, this other group of people that we're now both talking about, how do we evaluate whether or not this statement is true? Really changes everything. So stop using I, and all of your things are going to get a lot better.
Yeah.
Not all your things, all your design discussions.
I think that's really good advice. So we're talking about taste. This might be a good time to transition into like good design versus bad design. Like Justin, I'm curious if there's any things that are considered, core principles of good design that distinguishes, designs from like, really, really good designs versus what people consider bad designs, or is it all totally subjective?
I'll take my shot at it first while Justin gets his thoughts together.
Okay. Okay.
I think bad design is easier to describe than good design, for sure. Because bad design makes something harder to use, right? It makes it harder to work with. Sometimes bad design just means that it's going to make it harder for you to iterate and get more cycles out. Like, you picked a design that is going to slow down your development. And that is not, you want to build your Orchid app, right? Like, and you've picked this intricate, like, animated thing that runs up and down the side, and it had to all be hand coded, and there's nothing that can come out of a package, and it looks beautiful, and all your users love it, and it actually serves like a cool functional purpose, and maybe it stands you out in the marketplace, and people are like, oh, that's very distinctive. And so all of those is going to get the good check mark. But one thing that you need to do as a company when you're, an Orchid app startup is you need to iterate really quickly. And the complexity of this piece of design is slowing everybody down. That makes it bad design. That is a different way of thinking about design as good or bad, right? Is what it's getting in the way of. The same way with making something accessible. Allowing people who are not like you, or allowing people who are using screen readers, or have to zoom in a lot to be able to experience it, to like, if your design is not being inclusive, I would argue that's bad design. And typically, and this is not always the case, but the more complex and the more design there is in something, so the more leaves and flowers and graphics and stuff, the harder it's going to be to make it inclusive as a design. The more kind of postmodern and boring and, like, you're looking at the Notions of the world and the Googles of the world. Those are much, much easier to make inclusive and to make accessible. Whereas, something that's pretty design heavy and looks great, like Duolingo, I think we're all fans of that app. Obviously, much more design heavy. I don't actually know what it looks like through a screen reader, and I'd be very curious about its accessibility. But I think that you need to like look at what the outcomes are about design, and then use those to judge it as good or bad. rather than on a purely aesthetic basis. Because there's an argument for like doing tongue-in-cheek bad design on purpose, like aesthetically, because like the vaporwave aesthetic. Not saying that's bad. Oh my god, I'm gonna get lynched. But there are reasons to make something that is not your taste. And taste shouldn't be the answer. It's like, but there are reasons like slowness, inclusivity, accessibility, speed of development, iteration time, your user's personal tastes that should be taken into account. And then just kind of mention one more thing that Justin was talking about in your last question, which was what it is. Take the word "I" out of the design. In the E-Myth Revisited, great book, everyone should read the E-Myth Revisited. He talks about logo design, and hey, how do you choose the right logo that you want for your new business? For a new business, right? And he said, well, it's the easiest answer in the world. You don't know. Get 5 designs that you kind of like that are different and send them to 10 or 15 of your potential customers and ask them to vote, because it's not even about you in any way. It is not your decision. You are trying to sell somebody something. Let the people you're trying to sell it to pick the design. And so that's all I have to say about that. Sorry. There you go, Justin.
I think it's exactly right. And I'm just going to build on that and say, like, there is no good design and there is no bad design. Like, all design is good and all design is bad. And the same design is also good and bad at the same time. Schrodinger's design. And it is true because design is only able to be evaluated in the context of what it is trying to do. And so for that reason, it's hard to say if something is good or bad until we know what it's attempting to do. If you think about it, right, even things that we think are obviously good design. Greg, you mentioned one, making something easier to use. Obviously good, right? Like, we don't want things to be harder to use, except when we have major safety concerns and we need to make it harder to do something that's super destructive or will kill you. And so in industrial things, when you have to flip power on and stuff, you got to do a lot of stuff before you can do that. We actually make it intentionally harder to use because the goal of the design is to do that. And so it's another great example of how there's no real objectivity. Now, for most things, yes, it is the case that we try to make it easier to use, and that's kind of obvious. And unfortunately, because it's obvious, it is also sort of useless in terms of design critique, because it's like, well, of course, for most things, we want it to be easier to use. But saying I want it to be easier to use is not valuable feedback, because it doesn't tell us how or why it is currently not easy to use. Right. And so again, we're back to the question behind the question. What is it about that? Right. And how does it attach back to the goal?
I'm thinking of like a design session for Jurassic Park where someone's like, where the usability expert's like, the button for turning off the electricity for the raptor cage, it seems like it's hidden in a deep menu. Like,
right. Shouldn't that be on the homepage?
Like, why is that so hard to find?
Right. And these are things that we do, right? Sometimes in design, this is such a great example. I'll like go into that example specifically here. Is sometimes we take things and we intentionally hide them. We intentionally make them difficult to get to. We intentionally put them behind things because that is a design decision where we are saying, we want the user to do this thing instead of this thing, or this is a highly destructive thing. So we're going to put it way down here and we're going to make you type the word danger before you delete it, right? Because we want you to really be sure that you're going to do this.
In best case, you're talking about best case scenarios. Most of the time that's used for things like the unsubscribe button or like cancel my account, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely right. Yes, I cannot be responsible for over or hijacking these concepts. But yeah, I think there are certainly some things that we could say are classical design things. You can look at the Gestalt principles of design, things like balance, symmetry, things like that, right? Which we could say are aspects that make things aesthetically more pleasurable to look at, usually for most people. And that is the case. And I think that if you want to get into the details of design, it does behoove you to learn a little bit about like color theory and the Gestalt principles and some of that if you want to. But honestly, if I am somebody who is building an orchids app and my goal is to get a lot of people who are using my app to do orchids, I don't want to become a designer because I got other things to do to get my app to market and to make sure that my orchid app works great. And design is probably not one of the most important things. So I'm probably not going to spend my time trying to get good at design. I'm going to find somebody who I trust knows what they're doing, and I'm going to have helpful critique sessions with them. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to worry about trying to learn about the Gestalt principles, because it's not really going to pay off for me.
Yeah. My other book recommendation is, I think, one on my shelf, which is Steve Krug's "Don't Make Me Think." I think I don't know if it's like super up to date or anything, but pick that up and And then, what was your suggestion, Justin? Critiquing design, discussing design.
Discussing design. Yeah. By the way, a quick note about Steve Krug. Steve Krug, I had the pleasure of speaking with him at a conference in Lisbon. Like, now it's been like 12 years ago or something like that. And he does something so cool when he gives talks. Most people, they'll give a talk and on stage they'll say, "Do you have any questions?" Right? Whatever. And they'll stand up there and ask questions. When he takes questions, he gets off stage and he walks to the person and stands in front of them and answers it to them face to face, instead of just answering it from the stage. And he'll walk around, he'll be like, "Anybody have any questions?" Someone will ask a question, he'll walk over to them, just have a discussion. And it made such a profound impact on me, because it was such a small change that made the overall experience for that person asking the question so much more personal. It just remarkable.
That's cool.
Anyway, that's my Steve Krug story.
So, for our final point, I want us to talk about, it's kind of related to our discussion, what is good, what is bad. Nothing's good, nothing's bad. It's more about goals. But what about good taste, developing good taste in design? I'm interested in what both of you have to say. You've already given some book recommendations. Do you have any specific websites or product examples? We've already touched on Duolingo that demonstrate good taste and what you consider good taste in design. We can also talk about examples of bad taste, because like we said, bad taste can sometimes be easier to identify than good.
Yeah, I think Justin and I both said a few times that design is not about taste, but there's another part of me which wants to kind of say something different. And it's not that design is not, the taste does not enter into it. It is that, what is taste? Let's just look at that word for a second. And it is a set of heuristics almost that are built up into you over time and experience, typically with being reinforced with educating yourself purposefully, right? Nobody ever wakes up thinking, oh, I've suddenly started loving opera. No, you start to like opera a little bit, and then you read a book about it, and then you start listening to more opera, and then you take a course on opera, and over time you're now oh, I can pick a Verdi out of a crowd, no problem. Whatever, you become an opera nerd or something. I don't know why I picked opera. It's so I'm just saying something.
No, I think that's a good example, because it's not very beginner friendly. Sort of Scotch, or beer.
Yeah, which I probably pick more freely. And so I think what I mean by, I think what I'm going to talk about design taste is the ability for me to look at something very quickly, and without actually being able to describe it myself exactly, I can tell you if it's good or bad. I can look at something and say, that's great. And the reason I can do that is because I've done it thousands of times. And I've had this conversation 1,000 times. And then I went and read the books, and I've designed things myself. And as a result, I have a taste of how things should look and feel. And then the thing that moderates that all the time is I know really good designers, and I know people who will look at something and will spot stuff I've missed, and they have better taste. And then I think that just means they have better heuristics. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about here, Justin. If you feel that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting point. I think that taste as heuristics is an interesting idea for sure. And I think that one thing you said is to an extent is that it does take reps, right? I mean, and there are some things that those of us who've done it for years and years and years, and I'm the same way. I can look at something, I can immediately tell you if I believe that it is good or bad, and again, in context of the goals that it's trying to achieve. And there are some things that I can look at usually, and I can tell you off the rip whether or not there are marks of quality, right? Like I can look and tell if it looks like there's a level of polish, right, versus not a level of polish. Now that's something that I think takes a long time to be able to spot and be able to understand. And that's just evaluating designs over and over and over and over. And again, continuing to ask why, right? I think that if you want to develop good taste, the best thing you can do is just walk around the world. And this isn't just web apps, but just walk around the world and be like, why do I like this? Why do I like my car? Why don't I like my car? Why do I like my house? Why do I not like my house? What are the things about it that I don't like? And in that introspection, if you do that with everything you come in contact with, which is probably my like ADHD. Like everything I ask, I'm like, why don't I like that? Or why do I like this? Right. And so I do this introspection all the time, but you start to develop the vocabulary and you practice more and more how to take what your eyes are sensing and turn that into some kind of interpretation that your brain can like make a point of view about, right? That's deeper than just like, I don't like it. And I think that the more that you do that, and quite honestly, I will be so bold as to say, I think the more you do that with everything in your life, the better critical thinker you will become in general. And that will ultimately make you better at understanding design and knowing what is and is not good when you see it, because a lot of it is about critical thinking.
I would say that there's I'll leave you with this, Sarah. Like there's a game that I've always enjoyed sending out. It's Can't Unsee, and I think it's like CANTUNSEE.space. Like I can't unsee that. Sorry, my accent is weird, so you probably have to repeat that. And if you search for that, it's a UI quiz where they put two pieces of design next to each other, and you have to pick which one is correct. And they get harder and harder and harder. And every now and again, we will run that game at the company, and I will get, I think there's like 20, 30 questions or something, and it's fun. It's a fun game. You get like coins for each right answer you get. And the consistent top scorers are always the people who are better with design, who can do it. And the people at the bottom, they're just not as good. And so we give them less design and UI, UX tasks. So go and play that and see what your score is.
And again, that's about reps. The people who've just done it more, it's like anything else, right? I think that, I would say that, if you want to get better at design and you want to get good at this, I don't think I would focus on, I wouldn't focus on trends. I wouldn't focus on fads. Should we use rounded corners? Should we not use rounded corners? Should we use big drop shadows or not big drop shadows, right? Of course, some of those things are things you have to take into consideration just in terms of fad and taste, especially if you're doing consumer-facing things. But I think if I were going to tell somebody who really was eager to understand and learn about design, how to get better at it, I would say focus on like first principles and fundamentals. What makes the world work, and how does design make things work, right, at a very low level? And one of the best books on this, and I think that everyone in design who's doing this professionally should read this book. If you're not doing this professionally, you should not read this book because you will not make it through it. But there's a book called The Design of Everyday Things, and this was written in like the 1980s, like 88, I think, or so. And what's beautiful about this book is it was written before the era of the web and UIs and all of this kind of thing, the type of design that we're talking about today, right? It was well before we could ever make orchid apps. But what he goes through is he talks about like, why are your light switches in the places that they are in your house? Why are your stove knobs arranged the way that they are? Why do certain things you interact with in the world, like door handles and stuff like that, work in the way that they do? And what was the idea behind the design? And those are the really foundational first principles of design that if you know those, you can apply them to anything. You can apply them to web apps, you can apply them to anything else. And many of the things will just automatically get solved. It all starts from first principles, and all the other stuff on top is really a lot less important.
Yeah, that sounds like a great book. This was really fun, Greg and Justin. Thanks so much for joining me today.
A pleasure. My pleasure.
So we covered a lot of ground. We talked about how to communicate your design concerns, like what type of language to use, what is good versus bad design. It turns out all design is good and bad, so that's good to know. And then we gave some tips on how to develop good taste in design. So to our listeners, we all encourage you to go out in the world, observe, think critically about things that you are seeing and interacting with and what you like and don't like about them. Maybe you can apply that to your Orchid app that you're designing, like I will. So thanks for joining us, listeners. And if you want more insight into various software and digital product development topics, then please join us next time and like and subscribe and follow Decoder Podcast. Until next time, take care.
Thank you, Sarah.
You guys.